In a bustling downtown cafe on a rainy Thursday morning, an unusual moment unfolded, one that several patrons would later describe as the kind of thing you only see once but never forget. It was the kind of morning when the city seemed to move half a step slower, as if the weight of the clouds had pressed everyone into a quiet, reflective haze. That was why the soft voice of a little girl, almost too delicate to carry far, drew the attention of a few early customers. Her father, a tall man with tired eyes and an apologetic half-smile, hovered behind her as she peered up at the woman sitting alone at a corner table. Witnesses said the girl, no older than 7, clutched a half-folded children's jacket, her fingers nervously twisting the fabric as she murmured something to her father before he gave her a small, encouraging nod. The woman seated at the table was someone many people in the building recognized instantly, even if they had never spoken to her. She was the CEO of Whitestone Innovations, a name that in this city carried an electric mixture of respect, fear, and fascination. She was known publicly as a strategist with cutting-edge composure, impossibly polished, always in control, and forever appearing as though she had planned the entire world 3 steps ahead. But on this particular morning, she wasn't conducting a meeting or preparing for an investor briefing. She was simply eating breakfast alone, a cup of black coffee positioned beside a half-finished bowl of oatmeal. Her tailored gray coat, still damp from the weather, sat neatly folded on the chair beside her. Or at least, she had been eating alone, until the father and daughter approached her table and the little girl, voice trembling but hopeful, asked, "Can I sit here?" That singular question, simple as it was, shifted the room's atmosphere. Those close enough to hear the girl's voice instinctively paused, their curiosity sharpening. The father stepped forward then, clearing his throat and offering a polite explanation. He said the cafe was unusually crowded, that every available table had already been taken, and that his daughter had begged him for somewhere cozy and quiet to sit while they waited for their food. He apologized for the intrusion, insisting that it was completely understandable if the CEO preferred privacy. After all, he recognized her immediately and assumed she was in the middle of something important. What happened next struck witnesses as surprising not because of what the woman said, but because of the subtle shift in her expression. Anyone familiar with her reputation expected a firm but courteous refusal. Not unkind, not rude, but distant, respectfully unreachable, as powerful executives often are. But instead, she glanced between the father and the young girl, then set her spoon aside as if the decision had been obvious all along. She gestured calmly toward the empty chairs and said something that rippled through the nearby tables with unexpected warmth. "Only if you eat too." The father blinked, taken off guard by her response, unsure for a moment whether she was joking or politely offering what she didn't truly mean. But the little girl, with the unfiltered enthusiasm that only children possess, immediately interpreted the invitation literally. She climbed eagerly into the seat beside the CEO, setting her small jacket on her lap before swinging her legs under the table. The father, however, hesitated, insisting that they weren't looking to impose and that they were perfectly fine waiting by the counter. The CEO shook her head, lifting her coffee with a calm, deliberate motion as she repeated her earlier words in a tone that made it clear she rarely had to repeat herself. "Sit. Eat. Both of you." A few nearby customers whispered to each other, unsure whether they were witnessing the softening of a famously reserved business leader or simply seeing a different side of a woman they had only ever observed through headlines and glass-paneled boardrooms. The father finally relented and lowered himself into the chair opposite her, still visibly unsure of the social boundaries he had just crossed. He introduced himself in a quiet voice, explaining that he had recently moved to the city with his daughter and was still adjusting to their new routines, new schedules, and new realities. His words carried a subtle strain of exhaustion, the kind that appears in single parents juggling more responsibilities than one pair of hands was ever meant to hold. Interestingly, the CEO listened, truly listened, with the kind of focus usually reserved for merger proposals or high-stakes negotiations. The girl, meanwhile, offered her own commentary, sharing her opinions on pancakes, rainy mornings, and the importance of colorful socks. She also explained that the jacket she was holding belonged to her mother, and though she didn't elaborate beyond that, The father's brief flicker of pain suggested a much longer story hidden behind the child's simple statement. Some customers said the CEO's expression softened noticeably after that, though others claimed she had always been capable of empathy, just not in public spaces where it could be misinterpreted as weakness. Regardless, she eventually signaled to the barista, requesting additional plates and instructing them to bring whatever the girl and her father had ordered directly to the table. The cafe staff complied quickly, perhaps motivated by the unusual sight of the high-profile executive sharing breakfast with strangers as they waited for the food to arrive. A quiet but unmistakable shift took place at that small corner table. The father gradually relaxed his posture, the girl chatted more freely, and the CEO responded to both with surprising patience. Observers later said it was the kind of interaction that belonged not in a corporate biography, but in the opening chapter of an unexpected human story, one that unfolded not because of a business deal, but because a child in need of a seat had asked the simplest of questions. Some might argue that nothing more occurred than an act of politeness. But for those who watched the moment unfold, it felt like something else, like the beginning of a narrative where strangers become significant, where the walls built by power, grief, or circumstance begin to thin, and where a single gesture inside a rain-soaked cafe sets in motion changes none of them saw coming. What happened after that unexpected cafeteria encounter began circulating around the company in fragments, because by the next morning the atmosphere in the building had shifted in a way no one entirely understood. Some employees whispered that the CEO had personally escorted an unfamiliar man and his child upstairs. Others claimed they saw her carrying 2 lunch trays and laughing in a way they had never heard from her before. The truth of it, however, was far simpler than the rumors suggested. It was the story of how a woman who carried the weight of an entire corporation on her shoulders found herself unexpectedly drawn toward a man who lived his life with a kind of sincerity she had almost forgotten existed. When the CEO returned to her office after that lunch, she didn't immediately dive back into her mountain of tasks the way she normally would. Instead, she found herself replaying the little girl's shy smile and the father's hesitant gratitude, and she could not understand why it lingered with her. She tried to focus on her spreadsheets, on the glowing financial projections, on the messages stacked in her inbox. But every time she attempted to center herself, her mind drifted back to that table near the window where a single dad had simply asked for a place to sit, as though he had no idea who she was. It wasn't the request that unsettled her. It was the honesty behind it, the total absence of calculation. In a world where nearly every person who approached her wanted something, access, approval, opportunity, he had asked for nothing more than a seat and the reassurance that he wasn't intruding. Employees noticed she was quieter that afternoon. Not cold, not removed, just thoughtful, as if something had nudged the rhythm of her day out of its rigid alignment. She responded to emails with slightly softer phrasing. She approved a departmental request she had been planning to deny. Her assistant remarked privately that she seemed almost human again, the way she had been years ago before the board polished her into a legend of efficiency. Meanwhile, downstairs, the single father finished his shift still wondering if he had made a fool of himself without realizing it. He was used to being judged, by customers, by former in-laws, by strangers who wondered why a man raising a daughter alone didn't fix his life by doing something more respectable than stringing together honest, but physically demanding jobs. But the CEO had not looked at him with judgment. She had looked at him like someone seeing a person, not a category. On his walk home, his daughter bounced beside him, telling him with all the excitement in her tiny body that the nice lady with pretty hair had given her extra fries and told her she had the brightest smile in the whole cafeteria. He chuckled at the retelling, not knowing that the CEO had never done such a thing for anyone, not employees, not visitors, not even corporate partners. The next day, fate twisted things a little tighter. A malfunction in the building's heating system forced some employees to temporarily relocate to different common areas, which meant the CEO found herself passing the cafeteria far more often than usual. Twice she saw the single dad working, but she kept walking, pretending to be absorbed in her phone even though her attention was fixed entirely on him. She told herself it was silly to notice someone like him when she barely had time to notice her own social life collapsing into silence. She also told herself it was just curiosity, nothing more. She had said those same words about many dangerous thoughts before. Later that afternoon, while reviewing quarterly projections, she overheard part of a conversation coming from the hallway. Two junior analysts were discussing how the cleaning staff was shorthanded and how one of the cafeteria workers had stayed late several nights in a row without complaint. She immediately knew it was him. The frustration that rose in her surprised her with its intensity. The idea of him overworking, undersupported, and exhausted in the same building she owned irritated her in a way she couldn't explain. She excused herself from the meeting with a vague excuse about taking a call and found herself walking through the service corridor, where she finally spotted him carrying a crate of supplies almost too heavy for one person. She nearly turned around before he noticed her, but he did. Of course he did. And his expression shifted into that same polite, hesitant smile. She remembered he apologized before she could say a word, claiming he didn't mean to be in her way. She surprised both of them by responding that he wasn't, and then offering to help him carry the crate. It was an absurd suggestion for someone in her position, but in that moment it felt like the only honest thing she could do. He laughed softly, and the sound of it echoed in the narrow hallway, dissolving whatever invisible barrier had made her feel as though she needed to keep her distance. He told her gently that she'd probably drop it on her foot, and she laughed harder than she should have at the truth of that statement. Something shifted then, not in a dramatic or obvious way, but like a quiet promise passing between strangers who didn't yet understand why they were drawn toward each other. They talked for a few minutes, not about the company, not about work, but about life. About how he ended up raising his daughter alone. About how she ended up running a corporation alone. About how loneliness can follow a person even when surrounded by thousands. She returned to her office afterward with her heartbeat still unsettled and her mind strangely light. She didn't try to stop the feeling this time. She let it follow her, linger around her, settle in the quiet corners of her thoughts where stress usually live. By evening, the tone of the entire building had changed simply because her mood had changed. She approved bonuses she had been postponing. She extended deadlines with understanding instead of impatience. She even thanked her assistant by name, something she hadn't done in months. None of it was intentional. It simply flowed from the unexpected reminder that even a CEO was still human, still capable of noticing someone, still capable of wanting something as simple as a conversation that wasn't measured by profit or power. That night, as she sat in her office reviewing a proposal, she heard faint laughter coming from the lower level. His daughter again, unmistakable. The sound tugged at her, drawing her to the window. She watched them leave the building together, the little girl swinging her father's hand, her coat too big and her backpack bouncing with every step. The CEO felt something stir, an emotion so unfamiliar she almost didn't recognize it. It was longing, yes, but also a fierce and sudden desire to protect a man and child who had walked into her life without even trying. She didn't know what any of it meant yet. She only knew that she would be thinking of them long after the building lights dimmed, long after she locked her office, long after another day of meetings tested her patience and resolve. Something had begun, and try as she might, she could not dismiss it. A single dad had asked if he could sit with her. She had said yes. And somewhere in the spaces between that simple exchange, something changed, quietly, steadily, and without permission. The rest of the office talked about Elena Marlowe like she was some impossible myth, untouchable, carved from ambition, a woman whose footsteps echoed through entire departments before she even arrived. But Daniel didn't see a legend. He saw the woman who sat across from him in the cafeteria, handing him napkins when his daughter spilled apple juice. He saw the woman who leaned back in her chair and laughed, not the sharp, intimidating laugh people expected, but the soft one that slipped out when she forgot to guard herself. And he saw the woman who had insisted he sit down and eat too, like she somehow knew he never did. Their lunches became a routine no one acknowledged out loud. Elena would appear, always pretending her presence was accidental, even though she timed her steps to coincide with his break. Daniel would pretend he didn't notice her scanning the room first, checking if the seat beside him was free. Some days they talked about his daughter's school drawings, sprawled across the table like little masterpieces. Other days they talked about quarterly reports and supply chain delays, which somehow felt lighter when she explained them. And sometimes they didn't talk at all. Silence came easily with her. the kind that made Daniel feel like he wasn't just tolerated but welcomed. That was new. That was dangerous. Rumors weren't far behind. People noticed things before either of them admitted anything, to themselves or anyone else. A CEO who chose to eat in the employee cafeteria. A single dad whose face went soft whenever she walked in. A quiet shift in atmosphere whenever the two sat together. The whispers never reached Elena directly. People were far too afraid of her for that, but they drifted around Daniel like fog he couldn't push away. He heard the first one while microwaving leftover spaghetti. "Look at him," someone muttered, unaware he was within earshot. "He knows exactly what he's doing." Playing the sympathy card for a promotion. Daniel didn't react. He simply stirred his lunch, even though his appetite had already drained away. The second rumor was worse. Two women at the vending machines, whispering behind manicured hands. "You don't think he's trying to trap her, do you? Men like him always want to weigh in. He's probably hoping she'll save him." Daniel walked past them, pretending he couldn't hear. But that one stuck like a thorn. Later that week, Elena found him sitting outside on a narrow bench near the maintenance wing, his lunch untouched beside him. His shoulders were tense. His eyes were distant. She approached quietly, her heels softened by the old pavement. "You missed lunch," she said, not accusing, just stating. Daniel didn't look up, just needed some air. She studied his posture before sitting beside him, leaving a respectful space. Not the space of someone avoiding closeness, but someone afraid to push too far. "Did something happen?" she asked. He shook his head, but the lie was transparent. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy. "People talk." Elena's expression didn't change, but something inside her sharpened. "They always do. About you. About me." He swallowed. "About my intentions." "Ah," she said quietly. "Those kinds of people." She waited, giving him room to continue. He didn't. He simply exhaled, the air leaving him in a long, defeated breath. Elena turned her head toward him. "Daniel," she said softly, carefully, "do you think I'm fragile enough to break because of office gossip?" "No," he said immediately. "Of course not." "Then allow me the dignity of deciding who I sit with." That startled a laugh from him. Short, tired, but real. "You're unbelievable," he murmured. "I try to be," she replied, her mouth curving. But then her smile faded. "Tell me what they said." He didn't want to repeat it, but she waited, patient, unblinking. Finally, he said, "They think I'm using you." Elena stared ahead, her jaw tightening. "You aren't," she replied simply, decisively, without hesitation. "I know," he said. But hearing it still, he didn't finish. He didn't have to. After a long pause, she spoke again. "When I first became CEO, people said I slept my way to the position." Daniel's head snapped toward her, shock slicing through his gloom. "What? That's predictable," she interrupted. "And unoriginal." She tapped her nails lightly against the bench. "People will always invent stories to make sense of things they don't understand. You can't control what they say, only what you answer to." Daniel looked at her then. Not the CEO, not the woman the world mythologized, but the human being beneath all of it. The one who carried her own scars. "I don't want this to make trouble for you," he said. "If you want distance." "No," she said immediately, almost sharply. "Don't finish that sentence." He blinked. "I'm not distancing myself because people think they're clever. I choose where I sit, and I choose who I spend time with." Daniel felt something warm, hope or fear or both, rise inside him. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a breath. Elena didn't respond right away. When she did, her answer was quiet, unguarded, almost vulnerable. "Because you don't look at me the way everyone else does." His heartbeat stumbled. "How do they look at you?" "Like a symbol, a headline, a threat." She looked at him fully now, her gaze steady. "You look at me like I'm human." The air between them thickened with something unspoken, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. Daniel inhaled, trying to steady himself. "Maybe that's because you let me." She didn't deny it. "Maybe." Their silence deepened, not awkward but layered. When Elena stood, she smoothed her coat and glanced down at him. "We're going to lunch tomorrow," she said, as though announcing a business decision. "And the next day? And the next?" Daniel huffed a breath. "Are you ordering me to?" "Yes," she said with an arch of her brow. "CEO privilege." He laughed despite everything. When she turned to leave, he expected the moment to end there. But she paused, looked over her shoulder, and added, "For the record." I enjoy your company. Don't let anyone steal that from us." Those words carried him through the rest of the day. What neither of them knew was that someone else had noticed their lunch routines. Someone with enough pettiness and jealousy to twist a harmless connection into something darker. That someone was already planning to act. And the next morning, when Daniel arrived at work, everything was about to change. The rest of the day moved in a way neither of them expected. For Avery, the CEO who had spent years building walls so high no one at the company dared even imagine climbing them, the hours passed with an odd tug in her chest. It wasn't distraction exactly. It was more like awareness, a persistent hum reminding her that something had shifted. She kept seeing flashes of the cafeteria table, the way his hands shook ever so slightly when he confessed he hadn't eaten yet, the way his daughter hesitated behind him with her backpack clutched to her chest like a shield. She had met thousands of employees, consultants, competitors, and shareholders over the years, but she could not remember the last time someone had looked at her without calculation. Only exhaustion and sincerity. And yet, even as she tried to continue with meetings, numbers, and strategy sessions, another thought kept surfacing like an uninvited ripple across a still lake. Why had it mattered to her so much that he ate? Why had she felt something clench in her stomach when he tried to thank her, like she didn't deserve gratitude for such a small act? There was an ache inside her she couldn't identify, but she refused to acknowledge that it felt uncomfortably close to loneliness. Meanwhile, down on the 5th floor, Daniel spent the afternoon trying to focus on his work, but he found it almost impossible. The moment the CEO walked into the cafeteria had stunned him enough. The fact that she sat with him was beyond comprehension. But the moment she told him he could sit there only if he ate, and the tone she used, gentle but firm, had left a deeper mark. He hadn't been taken care of in a long time. Not since before his wife died. People at work usually avoided him or treated him like a fragile glass that would break if handled wrong. No one told him what he needed. No one saw him. And yet this woman, someone who was supposed to exist in a universe so far out of his orbit that he could barely imagine approaching her, had looked at him like he was a human being deserving of basic dignity. That alone would have been enough to rattle him for days. But what shook him more was the realization that she noticed he wasn't eating. She noticed his daughter's silence. She noticed everything, and she didn't treat any of it like an inconvenience. There was strength in the way she carried herself, yes, but beneath it he sensed a heaviness, like she too had learned how to survive things no one else ever saw. Hours later, as the building began to empty and the shift toward evening softened the usual corporate tension, Avery found herself walking through the quiet hallways without understanding why her steps pulled her toward the 5th floor. She told herself she was simply doing a soft inspection, trying to understand workflow during a transitional period. It was a reasonable explanation, the kind she could present to a boardroom without feeling foolish. But it was also not true. What she was really doing was searching for the feeling she'd had earlier, the one that reminded her she was something other than a title. She told herself she only wanted to check on him because he looked unwell, because an employee skipping meals was a risk to productivity. But the moment she caught sight of him through the office window, leaning over his desk, fatigue etched into his face as he glanced at a photo of his daughter taped to his computer, she felt something tighten inside her with an intensity that startled her. She stepped back before he saw her, unsure why she suddenly felt like she had intruded on something sacred. She wasn't supposed to feel this. CEOs didn't feel things like this. Her entire identity was built on being untouchable, unshakable, unapproachable. But for the first time in years, she didn't want to be any of those things. She just wanted a reason to step into the room and ask if he was all right. She wanted to ask why he always looked like he carried the weight of two worlds. She wanted to ask what happened to the woman in the framed photograph. But she didn't do any of that. Instead, she forced herself to turn away and walk toward the elevator, reminding herself that boundaries existed for a reason and that her involvement had gone too far already. Yet fate, as it always seemed to do with them, had another plan. Just as she reached the elevator, the door slid open and Daniel stepped out, startled to see her. His eyes widened with the same mixture of surprise and respect he always displayed around upper management. But this time there was something else, something neither of them could name. Avery felt the moment stretch between them like a held breath. She could have walked away. She could have nodded politely and let him pass. Instead, almost without thinking, she said his name softly, and the way he froze told her he hadn't expected the CO to remember it. He answered her with a quiet, "Yes, ma'am." His voice carried exhaustion, humility, and a tentative thread of something like hope. She shook her head gently at the formality, her voice lowering to something only he could hear as she told him he didn't need to call her ma'am outside of official meetings. It startled him enough that he laughed awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck as he apologized. That gesture, so unguarded and sincere, broke something open inside her, something she had locked away long before she ever became the woman everyone else believed she was. They stood there, both trying to pretend this moment wasn't charged with something neither understood. She finally spoke, telling him she noticed he stayed late often and suggesting he be careful not to burn himself out. The comment shocked him because no one, not even his supervisors, ever acknowledged how hard he worked or how much he struggled to balance parenthood and responsibility. When he attempted to explain that he needed the overtime, she saw the embarrassment flicker in his eyes, the shame he tried to hide, even though he had nothing to be ashamed of. Something inside her softened even more than before, and she wanted to tell him that he didn't need to justify himself, that he was doing more than enough, that he had every right to be proud. She didn't say those things, though. She only nodded, held his gaze for a few seconds longer than she should have, and let the silence between them fill with everything neither could say out loud. When she finally stepped into the elevator, she didn't look away from him until the doors closed. That night, neither of them slept well. Avery lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of their interactions, every word, every silence, every small moment of unexpected connection. She knew she was crossing an invisible line just by thinking about him. But she also knew that something in her was waking up after years of numbness. Daniel, on the other hand, kept turning over thoughts of her kindness, her strength, and the strange, unspoken layer beneath her voice. He wondered why someone so powerful had looked at him like he mattered. Neither of them realized it yet, but this was no longer a passing encounter or an unusual workday. It was the beginning of something their carefully structured lives were not prepared for, something that would challenge everything they believed about power, vulnerability, and the kind of people they thought they were allowed to love. Daniel did not expect Isabella's reaction, nor did he understand the deep, quiet reasoning behind it. When she agreed to stay for dinner at his modest apartment, he assumed it was simple politeness or perhaps sympathy. He didn't realize it was her way of grounding herself, of reconnecting with something she'd lost while climbing her way to the top of the corporate world. She watched him move around the small kitchen with surprising gentleness, preparing grilled chicken and vegetables while his daughter, Lily, colored on the floor nearby. Everything felt disarmingly humble, yet profoundly warm. Isabella had dined in restaurants with Michelin stars, but never had a meal felt so human, so real, so undeservingly comforting. She didn't tell Daniel that she had not eaten a home-cooked dinner with another person in years. Her life was a streak of meetings, catered meals, power lunches, evening calls, and late-night snacks eaten alone over spreadsheets. Watching Daniel sprinkle salt over the pan while humming under his breath brought her an emotion she had forgotten how to name. It was not romance. Not yet, anyway, but something gentler, like nostalgia for a life she never had. Lily looked up from her drawing and smiled at Isabella with an honesty only young children possessed, as if offering friendship without needing any explanation or introduction. Isabella felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been clenched for far too long. During dinner, Daniel apologized more than once for the simplicity of the meal. Isabella kept insisting she preferred it. He didn't realize she meant it quite literally. Money had never been her problem, but time, sincerity, and connection had slipped through her fingers while she was busy building an empire. The food tasted better because of the environment. A small table slightly too wobbly, mismatched plates that had clearly been bought secondhand, the faint scent of lavender detergent in the air, and a single dad doing his best to make life decent for his little girl. It was a world she had never inhabited, but one she found herself reluctant to step away from. When Daniel told her more about his life, he didn't do it as a plea for sympathy. He spoke plainly, explaining that Lily's mother had left when she was still a baby. He had been working flexible construction jobs ever since, always prioritizing Lily's routine over anything else. Isabella felt no pity, only admiration. She knew men with more money, more resources, and more support who were incapable of handling even a fraction of what Daniel managed each day with quiet resilience. She noticed how he checked on Lily's homework without hovering, how he cleaned as he cooked, how he listened before responding. It reminded her of why she had stepped into that cafe that morning in the first place. She was exhausted from a world where no one listened, where people acted first and understood later. Daniel was different, and she knew he didn't even realize it. After dinner, Lily ran to show Daniel a drawing she had made. It was a picture of three people sitting at a table: the girl, her dad, and Isabella. Something about that simple act unsettled Isabella in the softest, most unexpected way. Lily had included her without hesitation, without questioning her importance or position. Children didn't overthink emotional boundaries the way adults did. They simply drew the people who mattered in that moment. Isabella found her throat tightening in a way she couldn't easily hide. Daniel must have sensed something shifting because he grew quieter, more deliberate in his movements, as though he didn't want to intrude on whatever Isabella was feeling. He misunderstood the emotion as discomfort, perhaps imagining she wanted to leave. Instead, she was grappling with a realization that frightened her more than any corporate confrontation ever had. She wasn't afraid of Daniel. She wasn't afraid of being close to him. She was afraid of how much she longed for connection and how long she had denied herself anything resembling it. When it was time for her to leave, Lily insisted on giving her a sticker as a thank you. Isabella placed it on the inside of her phone case, surprising even herself. Daniel walked her to the door, and for a moment they stood there, facing each other in silence that felt warm, not awkward. He thanked her again for the kindness she had shown him and Lily. Isabella found herself thanking him in return, though she couldn't quite articulate why. Her voice softened when she told him he was doing a remarkable job raising his daughter, and she meant every word. That I in the car, she sat for several minutes before starting the engine. She stared at the apartment building, only dimly lit by porch lights, and wondered when the last time she had felt this kind of peace was. Something in her life had shifted that night, not dramatically, but with the quiet certainty of a seed being planted. She didn't know what would come of it. She only knew she wanted to see them again, not as a CEO fulfilling a professional curiosity, but as a woman rediscovering a part of herself she had long abandoned. It was the beginning of something she couldn't yet name, but she felt it anyway. Something real, something human, something she could no longer ignore.